You're listening to Agile Ideas, the podcast, hosted by Fatima Abuchi. For anyone listening out there not having a good day, please know there is help out there.
Vladimir, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Fatima. I'm happy to be here with you and the audience.
Amazing. And you are on this podcast all the way from Denmark, which we'll delve into a little bit more. So all the way on the other side of the world. I've already told our listeners a little bit about yourself, but in your own words, maybe if you want to just give us a bit of an overview of what you've done and what you're doing today.
Yeah, so as you probably already told the audience, I'm an associate professor here at the University of Aarhus. Aarhus is the second largest city in Denmark after Copenhagen, and the university is the largest employer. I'm here. I teach many things here. I teach project management. I teach courses in political economy, and also how to thesis guidance. I have a course, an online course that to prepare students for their thesis. And I also do research in the area of governance of natural resources and the impacts of natural resources. And before I used to work in microfinance when I was in Australia, microfinance in the Pacific and in Asia. And before that, I used to be an academic at the University of the South Pacific. I've done a little bit of everything. Well, not everything, but a little bit of different things in my career.
Mm-hmm.
That's
Beautiful.
discount. Yes.
It'd be really good to delve deeper into that. You've got a mixture of academic, and then you've also worked in the consulting world, which we'll touch on a little bit more. But to kick us off today, I'm interested to know what was the most frustrating thing that happened to you last week?
So, well, the most frustrating thing perhaps is related to the best thing that happened, because I finally made it here to Denmark after a very long trip. Perhaps I should tell you a little bit about what our plans were. My wife and I lived here in Denmark for 6 years, but we were planning to go back to New Zealand in this year. And she got a job there, so she had to go earlier than me. She went there with one of my daughters. I have two daughters. She went there in January to start a job. And I was supposed to go there in March, after the half of the semester with my oldest daughter. So what happened was that, of course, they closed the borders, and I was at the airport, and both my daughter and I were denied boarding because we were traveling on Australian passports and not on New Zealand passports. My wife is Kiwi, so we said to them, we are a family unit, and they're expecting us, and they said, no, borders are closed. Okay, so it's the first time that's ever happened to me, actually. So I decided to travel to Australia instead. So I bought a ticket the following day, and we traveled there. And this is before Australia was requiring people to self-isolate, but there was no mandatory quarantining in a hotel. Yet I think it came in about 3 or 4 days after we arrived, and we were in that process of isolation when I started getting a little bit sick, and I thought, this is weird. So I went to get that test for COVID, and it was positive. It came out positive. So yeah, so I thought, this is bad. The illness took over, but it was actually, I expected something worse because, we've heard so much about it.
Yes.
And I did get fevers and nausea in the end, and headache, but nothing life-threatening. I didn't feel that my life was. There was only one time when I actually lost a little bit of faith because it was when the nausea started. But I rang the doctor, and the doctor said, we won't admit you to the hospital because you basically, what you'll be doing here is the same that you're doing at home. So
Okay.
yeah. So the other thing that was frustrating was that my daughter was there with me, and I had to interact with her even though I had a mask and everything. But it's easier for the virus to be contagious, and so. I asked my sister to take her away, and then they had to be for 2 weeks in quarantine. And I continued being sick, but like I said, I could watch TV, I could cook for myself, I could, have showers and all of that. I had energy to do that. But every night, there was the bout
Yes.
of fevers and that, but never respiratory problems. Anyway,
Yes.
after that finish, I was declared fine, and then I went to my parents because my parents live in. All of this was happening in Brisbane, and then from Brisbane we had to start the other thing of trying to get into New Zealand, where my wife and my other daughter, and it took quite a while. Actually, we had to get in touch with a member of parliament to intervene for us. And in the end, after 3 weeks, I got the visa. So I went there with my daughter. We stayed 2 weeks in quarantine, and then we finally met on the 1st of June. This is after, we thought that it was we were living on the 22nd of March, and we thought we were going to see each other the next day. But yeah, it took that long. And then coming back, of course, because I knew I had to come back to
Yes.
teach. They said, "Oh, if you leave, your status as resident is no longer applies. You have to apply," and I
Oh.
really didn't want to do that.
Oh.
So yeah, so I applied for multiple entry visa, which they granted just 1 week before I came here. So for me, the best thing that happened was having arrived here and starting classes. But frustrating, I guess, in the sense that I came here and the COVID was the infection levels here were higher than in New Zealand.
Yes.
So I thought this is really frustrating. I've done all this effort to come to a country that actually, it's more likely that I'm going to get reinfected here than where I was. But
Yes.
nothing's happened so far, and I'm quite happy to be with the students. Teaching online is for a whole semester is quite tiring, and
Yes.
is not conducive to students being social and learning the possibilities.
Yeah, absolutely. Wow,
Mm.
that sounds like an absolute marathon of events to actually get you back to New Zealand. And how many months was it before you saw your wife and your other daughter?
Well, March, we're talking a whole of April,
Yeah.
whole of May. So two months and a week. So that's
Wow.
9 weeks. Yeah, 9 weeks. And the idea, well, extra, yeah, but
Yeah.
because she left on the 3rd of January, so plus two, yeah, that's 5 months. Yeah,
Wow. Well, that's
yes,
incredible.
but
I think a couple of things that, as to point out, like obviously, you and I spoke, and your daughter's a teenager. She fortunately didn't get it, even though she was traveling with you the entire time. So that's quite remarkable and positive to hear. And then obviously spending some time in Australia, you going through from one quarantine to another must have been exhausting. How How did you maintain, I guess, your resilience to go through that from the journey leaving Denmark through all of the travel back to Australia, back to New Zealand? And how did you sort of remain strong and keep your spirits high?
Well, many things, keeping my support networks, talking to friends. I actually made it public, the fact that I had COVID. So I put on the, on my Facebook page, I have been tested positive, and people started to pour their sympathies, and we, a lot of people took the opportunity then to ring me, people that I haven't talked for years, or people that all the people were, really, really that had only seen me like a few days before. They wanted to know how I was. So activating support networks, reading correct information, because as you know, there is a lot of misinformation
Yes.
regarding COVID. And so I made sure that I was reading, scientific information, and nothing coming out of social media, because it's the kind of news you get there are very, very disheartening. And so what happens when you hear those sorts of news is that you get you get sad, or you get angry, or all those states that are not conducive to well-being. So I try to focus on information that was reliable. Also, trying to continue life as possible. So in my line of work, it's a very solitary thing. So I was able to focus a lot on reading, and doing things that I don't have time for when I'm busy teaching, for instance. Um, and Also, I think, my daughter was with me, so there's always a sense of responsibility. So I have to think. I need to I need to stay strong despite and I need to present the situation as manageable. So that my daughter
Yes.
doesn't feel that the whole world is falling apart.
Yes.
And I don't know if you've ever seen that movie Life is Beautiful, where the father is actually explaining to his son, all these things in a way that he can understand, even though really the world was collapsing around him, and even to the last minute.
Wow.
So yeah, it, the other thing I think is that I have an attitude in life that I cannot be entitled. I mean, I'm not entitled. I like to think that I'm not an entitled person. So, bad things can happen. And uh, the world at that time was closing borders, governments were closing borders, a lot of people were getting sick, lots of disturbance, and what have you. And so for me to be traveling at that time, it's actually was a luxury. I I could have stayed home, but we wanted to go ahead with the plans, but it was risky. So we knew already that there were risks involved, and so when we got to the airport, I thought, okay, so this is something that we were not expecting, but it was possible. Let's see now what is the next step. And so we took it a bit at a time. Finally got to Australia, and then
Yes.
heard the news about the COVID, and then again, I mean, I was taking it day by day. Fortunately, the nurses were ringing me every day and asking me. So focusing on these things and not thinking that, I don't deserve to be sick. I'm actually getting anything can happen in life. So
Yes.
you just have to deal with it, deal with the circumstances as they arise.
Yeah,
And despite
absolutely.
those,
And controlling what you can, and focusing on what you can control and not what you can't control.
That's right. Yeah. I mean, my body was fighting a disease. It was doing
Mhm.
its thing. All I had to do was just give it, provide the best circumstances for that
Yes.
for it to happen. So not getting too worried, eating well, doing the things that I could do.
Yeah.
So yeah, that mixture of things, and. Fortunately, I don't think with this virus being so new, that I don't think I have any side effects.
Mhm.
But we don't know, so it remains to be seen whether there's any long-term problems. But so far, I feel good. Like even by the time that I was in quarantine in New Zealand, so almost 4 weeks? No, sorry, 3 weeks after having been discharged, um I was already exercising, in the hotel room because I was
Okay.
thinking, it's time to start feeling, being active and physically getting better. So, and it's
Amazing.
been getting better ever since. Yeah. Mm.
Amazing. That's really good. It's a really positive story, and it's good to see the resilience. And like I said, I think when you have children and that life is beautiful, I'll put that in the show notes. Is a really good example of being strong for your children. So that's amazing. Now I think it would be great to delve a bit deeper into your sort of what you thought you were going to be when you grew up, when you were younger. I know you were doing a lot of work, in the academia world and microfinance and natural resources and economic diversification and so many different things. And I want to touch on all of those. But I want to know, when you think back to your sort of younger days, did you know that you wanted to be a professor? Did you know what your career was going to be? When did you sort of know what you wanted to do, and how did that come about growing up?
Well, I would say, I think some people have a very strategic way of thinking about their career, and they can plan ahead for, I don't know, 5 years at a time or even 10 years at a time. They say, I want to be such and such,
Mm-hmm.
by this. Um, I've been more opportunistic in that sense. In just grabbed opportunities as they come. I knew when I was a kid that I wanted to study at university, and
Mm-hmm.
I was fascinated by electronics. So I wanted to be an electronic engineer. I wanted to be at one stage, and then I decided that I wanted to be a car designer because
Okay.
I love cars and that. Um, but then the war happened because I'm from El Salvador, and we had a civil war from 1980 to 1992. I was in 1979 when all these thoughts about what I wanted to do in life were happening. I was 14, and the war started. It wasn't all of a sudden. It was actually a slow process. It had started since 1977. And my parents, of course, were part of the resistance,
Yes.
so we were deeply implicated in, fighting against the government. So. Um, it didn't take very long for us to realize. I mean, my parents decided to take us to to put us out of danger. So they took us to Costa Rica, and they
Mm-hmm.
they remain in El Salvador because they thought that the war was going to finish soon, and that didn't happen. So 6 months later, they were with us in Costa Rica, and we were there as refugees. So, we couldn't go back. We had political reasons not to be. We have fear of our lives, and so we were there as refugees. But then we decided that my dad decided that it was going to be better to join all the members of the family who were going to the U.S. And so we went to the US. We did this illegally because there was no way we could get papers to travel to the US legally. So we did that, and we we arrived in Houston. We met our rest of the family. Not my mom and my mom. My mom remained in Costa Rica, but cousins, lots of cousins. But my age or a little bit older. They were all there, who had escaped the war, and they were looking for jobs and that sort of thing. And so I started working, but I also entered the school. The one of the schools there, and that kind of derailed my plans of being, in engineering or that sort of things, because when I was doing mathematics still in Costa Rica, I was like the best student, one of the best students that one of my good friends and myself were the best students in the class in mathematics, in physics, in chemistry. But when I got to the US, it was such a different system that I lost the how they in mathematics they teach you certain things and then you jump into more complex things. Well,
Yes.
when I went to the US, it was they've done so many other things that I completely lost the continuum. So I remember going to this class in algebra, and I had done algebra in the last year in Costa Rica, but by the time I was they were doing things that I couldn't understand. So my grades were not so good in that. But I did well in things like Spanish language, because I could speak it.
I wonder why.
Yeah, physical education, I could do well. What else? Because I didn't speak English. I had to
Yes.
learn, so I was doing
Yeah.
English as second language. Geography, I did well. History, I did more or less. All these social science subjects, I did relatively well. So in the class of when we graduated, there was a class of 465 students. This is the senior year. I came up as I think it was 300. I was ranked 300, and I thought, okay, so this is not the best, of course. I'm kind of a little bit more, than a little bit better than the middle,
Yep.
but I also thought I'm not the worst because, there were students there who spoke perfect English, and all of that, and they were like, number. Sorry, I'm counting. So one is the worst, and 465 is the best. So
Okay.
300 is kind of closer to 400 than it is to one. So number one is the worst. And there were students there who spoke English, who they obviously came from they didn't want to be there, or came from really poor backgrounds,
Yes.
not suited to school, and so many of them did really poorly. And I thought that for somebody who didn't speak the language so well, coming 300 was a good achievement. That's what I thought to myself. But also, it smashed these dreams of wanting to do things in engineering. So what happened then is that I went back to Costa Rica because my parents by then were applying for refugee status in Canada. And that was so I went back, but the application was rejected. Then we applied for Australia, and Australia accepted us in September 1984. So we went there to Melbourne. And then I thought, okay, I better start studying so I can get into university. And I did that. And after many attempts and studying English, I finally made it in 1987 to Griffith University in Brisbane, because we moved, from Melbourne to Brisbane. And so I was able to make it, but the undergraduate course that I took was Asian Studies.
Mm-hmm.
And one of my friends explained this to me. He said, "Oh, these kind of studies will help you do. It's a generalist degree. You have to study a lot of politics," and which I was fascinated by, and and then you may be able to work in with the foreign service, with the civil service, with companies doing trading. You may be able to find a job overseas. All things that I really liked as well. But by that stage, my interest in electronics and engineering were slowly subsiding, and I was much more into the social sciences. So I used to spend a lot of time. I was one of those nerds who would go to the library after class and just sit there and read whatever book came, close by. So of course, there was the reading list, but then I'd be reading other things as well. Or Friday afternoon was the best time because I could feel, it's very quiet here in the library, and so I would just go there and just consume, all these books. Uh, it, and also I could feel that in class, my experience having come from a country that was torn by a civil war was perfect. I could speak about the breakdown of democracy. I could speak about, because a lot of students in Australia thought that democracy is basically so strong and could never, it's infallible. But of course, that's not the case. Having come from a country like that, you can see it can break down. Then things like the rise of dictatorships. How a dictatorship governs, how it controls people, how it's managed to control ideology and that sort of thing, and how people react. Basically, some of them, a lot of people just continue their daily lives. So a whole lot of things for me, I had leave those things, and by reading about it in books, it was almost like confirming the things that I had lived. So I started, and of course, the other thing that I also realized is that many of these problems were related about many things. One is the position of, say, Central America, in the world. It's a it's a peripheral place. It's not part of the center, the core of the world in terms of economics, in terms of politics, in terms of culture. And so, so I don't know if you remember about a year ago when Trump said, these countries are in the asshole of the world.
Yes, I do. I don't think I can forget that one.
Yeah. So I mean, he said, El Salvador, Haiti,
Yep.
and of course, in his wisdom, the country of Africa. For him,
Yep.
the Africa is a country, even though there's something like
Yep.
30 plus countries there, but the country
Yes.
of Africa. And of course, these are peripheral countries. They're very far away from places of importance. But
Yes.
what really incensed a lot of people is not the fact that that's actually true, but the fact that he said it.
Yep.
Because
Yeah.
when say, for instance, somebody from those parts of the world say, we don't matter that much, or we're very far away from the centers of power, we're saying it, but we know the reasons. Whereas when he was saying it, basically he was blaming somebody, but at the same time taking advantage of the situation, which is that for many years there were people in these countries who wanted to who wanted to improve their situation, and then the U.S. basically sent troops or advisors to try to stop these attempts at improving the situation. So it's not very nice to be saying, "Oh, you are in that situation," when you know that in the past,
Yes.
the U.S. government foreign policy has basically actively done things to mitigate these countries from, you know, improving themselves, and it's something that happens to
Yes.
now. I mean, the whole situation about the caravans, the hundreds of people who leave from
Yep.
Central America into the US and some end up in jail, some end up with their kids being taken away, and that
Yep.
sort of thing. So it's a very complex relationship, and one that you can't just say, oh, these countries are. I would have been more careful and said, these countries are in that, but the conditions in which they are in, they cannot escape the conditions in which they're in. Something like that, but no,
Yes.
oh, they're in the asshole of the world, and they deserve it. Almost, it sounded almost like that. Anyway,
Yeah.
the thing is that I thought, that the best way for me to understand the situation, one, not just politics, but also the economics of things,
Mm-hmm.
and try to understand how, for instance, countries developed, how they
Yes.
become, how they improve. And I thought that doing Asian studies was a good thing because at the time, as you know, there were countries like Singapore, like Taiwan, like Hong Kong, that were moving very quickly towards what we call now, development. So improving their situation, in the world
Yes.
stage, and becoming basically creating better opportunities for their citizens. And so, I was also fascinated by Japan, and how they did. They've done as their position in the world is important.
Yes.
Now, after in the first in 2 centuries ago, they were basically a poor country, and look where they are now. Whereas Latin America gained independence in around the same time, and was never able to gain that position of prominence. So
Mm.
for me, that was also interesting to study and to see what were the things that made certain countries work better than others, and also what is it about the world economy that maintains this idea of countries that are core to the system and countries that are peripheral or even marginalized, in that system.
Mm.
Yeah, no, so I did a um, studied political economy. When I finished my undergraduate, and then I went to Japan to work. Came back, did honors, and then did my PhD. I finished in 2003, and I was so lucky that I was like a few months before finishing my PhD, an ex-colleague of mine called me from University of the South Pacific and said there is a job here for 6 months to cover for
Mm-hmm.
somebody. Do you want to take it? So I said yes. I finished with PhD on the 28th of June 2003, and on the 4th of July of the same year I was in Fiji. So I don't know if you can see the thread here, but I
Yes.
actually didn't think that it was going to, I did want to study. I was
Yes.
passionate about, studying these things, but each of these steps I didn't know I was going to do a PhD when I went to Japan. I didn't know. I knew that I wanted to do more than an undergraduate degree because I wanted to find out more. So I did
Yes.
I did my what do they call it, the masters, not the masters, the um, uh, in Australia they have this year that is called honors. Yeah,
Honors. Yep.
honors years, which basically prepares you for either masters or a PhD. And I did really
Wow.
well. But before, yeah, as I finished my this honors year, I actually didn't go straight to study. I really wanted to travel the world, and I wanted to travel it by bicycle. So I embarked on a tour from Brisbane to India by bicycle, and
What?
I took
I need to know how that happened. So,
all right, okay, yeah. So I took off from Brisbane with my panniers and everything, and I
yes.
traveled all the way to Darwin, and then from Darwin I jumped on a plane to Timor, and then to Indonesia, and then Singapore. And by that stage, had been 8 months of travel, and I was sick of
Wow.
traveling by that stage. I was like, I don't want to meet another person who will ask me about my life, and I want some familiarity. So I didn't get made it to India, so I came back to Australia. But it was, it was an amazing trip, and I'm still when I find the time again to do it, something crazy like that. But it was nice.
Maybe a little bit further down the track when the COVID pandemic
That,
comes down and we can open some borders. Okay, I have so many questions for you now. You've just given so much good information that I don't think anyone really knows, and I love the fact that you've taken your lived experiences and, as you mentioned at the beginning, opportunistic situations around where you've gotten to today by going down that path, as opposed to what some of us struggle with is having a predetermined view of what's the next 5 years or 10 years, or what do I want to be, what do I want to do. So I love that, and I think it's incredible that you've now taken that educational academic journey, and then if I recall correctly, you ended up going into the consulting space where you did some consulting work with WorleyParsons, a really giant global consulting firm. How did you find that working, taking all the academia that you'd learned from, and then going into consulting, and then now you're back in academia land? How was that experience in the consulting world, and how do you feel that you were able to leverage the knowledge that you'd learned in your studies to actually then apply that with that consulting firm?
Yeah, so it was actually because I think I told you the last thing I did was, worked in Fiji and in academia, came back to Australia, and I worked for a foundation, a research foundation, and a lot of the work we were doing there was a little bit, consulting, but also doing research. It was not a university; it was more applied research. For these companies or for projects and things like that. So that kind of prepared me a little bit. Then I did a stint at the Center for Social Responsibility in Mining at the University of Queensland. And again, doing quite a fair bit of work in doing research, applied research into basically projects that were consulting projects. So the companies wanted us to do a study. For instance, this mining company wanted an economic study of Lihir,
Yes.
the mine that they own there in Papua New Guinea. So I had already, I guess, prepared a little bit. Of course, I didn't know it at the time that that's what was happening. But when I went into this consulting company, they were interested in the fact that I had worked with the resources sector, and we were in the social team, the social compliance team. I have to admit, it was a little bit confronting at the beginning, because I had never had to work, for instance, in terms of time, with time being measured against you. So you have
Yes.
2 hours to do this job.
Yes.
Every hour had to be accounted for a particular budget.
Yeah.
That was a little bit shocking to me, because I thought, wow, I have to do this very quick. And I
Yeah.
realized then that, whereas in academia we spend a lot of time making sure that all the details are right, and time is basically, no, it's not unlimited, but it is, there's more time.
Yes.
In this company, we just had to get the stuff it wasn't about detail. It was about trying to get the best details within the time that what you were given. So work quicker, and also in different directions. So again, in academia, you can spend a whole lot of time analyzing one particular issue for a very long time, whereas here, 1 hour you'll be working on getting statistics for particular mine. Another time it'll be contacting suppliers, because of the community relations teams wanted to know, what kind of contracts they had that would impact on the community, things like that. So it was very, very, very different. Perhaps the one thing about WorleyParsons is that it's such a huge company that I was working in a small team, and I felt that I was, a very small cog in a huge machine, whereas I worked in other places where your work is much more connected with not just with your clients, but also with your other colleagues. So
Okay.
the working in big companies feeling is, and like I said, even though our team was only 8 people, the social team, but still I felt that we were very small in this huge machine that was the company. That was so it being, you had to be efficient, you had to be very flexible, you had to work with people that didn't have any clue about social problems. So most of the people were around there were engineers, and scientists, and a lot of times you had to explain to them in language they could understand, usually numbers. You had to, the things that were happening, on the ground, so that they could make decisions. And again, that's a skill that is very important to have, because we are trained. Our training, our academic training, our disciplinary training really matters. So if you are an engineer or a medical doctor or an accountant, they understand the view they have is from a particular perspective, independent of whatever else they think, in terms of their ideology or what have you. But you also have that you have to take into account that we have been trained differently and we speak different jargons.
Yes, absolutely. I'm interested to know, you've done quite a bit in the resources space, and obviously you've worked with and in different resource dependent countries. Can you help our listeners understand what is a resource dependent country? And then I want to understand a little bit more about one of your recently co-authored reports called The Analysis of Economic and Social Effects of Pueblo Viejo Mining Project. So you've done a lot in the resource sector. First of all, what is a resource dependent country, and why does having natural resource wealth lead to poor macroeconomic stability? Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so a resource-dependent country is one whose economy depends much more on the resources sector than some other countries. So when you divide the economy into primary, secondary, or if you look at, say, the economic sectors as mining, construction, agriculture, manufacturing, tourism, education, all this, and the mining, for instance, or resource extraction. I think the World Bank says if your economy is more than 15%, if your GDP is more than 15% If mining or oil generates more than 15% of your GDP, then you have an economy that is dependent on natural resources. So it's problematic. Any country that relies on one single type of economic activity is much more susceptible to shocks from the outside or even from the inside. So you can see it now, for instance, in terms of tourism. And you have a lot of countries, say in the South Pacific, or somebody was telling me about Thailand, for instance, whose economies rely quite heavily on tourism. With the onset of COVID, they are in real trouble, because they relied a lot on that. So it's exactly the same thing with natural resources. The countries that rely a lot on these commodities can be susceptible to changes, and it's not just shocks, like for instance, big like the recessions, like what we had in 2008, but it's an annual thing. So these commodities have a price in the international market, and these prices are not stable. They're very volatile. They go up and down. So what happens is that, for instance, with Australia, you had the commodities boom, from around the beginning of the year 2000, and up until 2008. A lot of money was coming in as generated by things like iron ore, coal, and all of these commodities. That was good for the mining sector and parts of the economy, but it meant that the value, the currency, started to pick up on value, and it then crowds out all the sectors, so that, for instance, if the Australian dollar is high, then people decide not to study in Australia or not to go to Australia for tourism, because it's not going to the whatever currency they're using is not going to be favorably exchanged toward a high Australian dollar, so they may decide to go somewhere else. And so, usually we think, the more the merrier, but it doesn't happen like that. It's actually the more of one type of economy will displace the others, and so it is always better to have a very a diversified economy. In Australia, city centers or the urban centers are quite diversified, but as you travel to the countryside and into the regional areas, they become less so. And the government, despite it trying, various type of diversification, I think the problem is that the economy that we're linked into doesn't allow for much government intervention. So, the last 30 years, we've had this idea that the markets should be more, that should be this deciding factors. They should be free, and so basically what happens with a lot of regions in Australia is that they have to compete without they have to compete with the world, basically, all the regions in the world, and with very little government intervention, or very little, with no protection from the state, to protect them against those currents. So, regions in Australia have to compete with, say, regions in in Thailand, in China, in various other parts of the world. And because of the wage structure, then we almost know who's going to win in that race. Unfortunately, what they thought as well is, we're going to be moving away from, say, manufacturing and labor-intensive activities towards more uh, um, smart industries. The problem with that is that it requires a lot of training. It requires highly skilled labor. The universities in Australia are able to provide that, but not everybody is able, despite the fact that Australian academic system has very little barriers, for people to go in. It's not like the US system where you actually have to pay upfront, really high sums to be able to get into a university, to get training, to be able to work in this industry. Australia doesn't have that, but there are still people who are not, whose skills are not in the are not this high skill, very brainy type of jobs. They do manual labor, and it's not a very insignificant part of the population that is engaged in these things. So basically what happens is that these people are left behind, by this new approach. And so you create this, this much more, this society and this economy that is much more hierarchical than it was, say, 40, 50 years ago. So this is one of the reasons why economic diversification is a good thing, is you need to have enough and different industries that cater for different skill sets. And we cannot expect everybody to be going to universities and to learn, highly skilled jobs, that highly skilled skills that require a lot of mathematics, for instance, or things like that. Not everybody's going to be able to do that. Yes, we need those things to remain competitive, but we also need the manual labor, and in some respects also we also need to protect some parts of the market, because they are not strong enough to compete with regions in other parts of the world. Yeah.
Do you think that the sort of the effects of the lack of economic diversification and some of these challenges, are they unique in the sense that it depends on the sort of the leadership of the country, or are you seeing this sort of stuff universally?
It's a universal problem, because from the 80s onwards, countries basically abandoned this Keynesian approach to economic management. So instead of having a very strong government, a very large government, a large state that would intervene in the economy and protect it, and be part of the economy as well. I don't know if you remember, a few years ago, Telstra was government owned. So was Qantas. So was many companies. They were government owned. This was an attempt by government to be able to set rules and standards, in relation to certain markets. That kind of wisdom was replaced by the neoliberal approach, which basically means, governments, the states should not be big; they should be just large enough to secure safety, safety of citizens and of the private sector, and and succession of governments, and always democracy, and to create the conditions for the private industry to thrive so that they can provide employment to everybody. And what we actually see is that instead of providing more employment, they provide less, because firms are not about providing employment as a welfare thing. They're about becoming efficient. Yeah, but
Yeah.
in other words, producing more with less resources, and labor is one resource. So if you
Yes.
can, for instance, in supermarkets, if you can replace checkout people for
Yep.
robots, then of course you're going to have these automated ones because they mean less cost.
And they're
It's
doing that now in the
Yeah, of course.
supermarkets.
Yeah,
I,
yeah,
I,
yeah,
I
yeah.
recall it many years ago where they started talking about. I was working in retail, and they were talking about doing it, and we were all shocked about it. Now it's the norm in most supermarkets.
Yeah, that's it's a logical conclusion
Mm.
of the in other countries. When you asked me whether this was a universal thing, I said yes, but in actual fact, there's variations. So
Yeah.
the United States, the English-speaking countries like the United States, New Zealand, Australia, Canada, the UK, are kind of at the forefront of this.
Mm-hmm.
Because of the cultural similarities, because of language similarity, but also because of the way they govern. So countries in continental Europe, especially Germany, um, France, they haven't followed that line of thinking so zealously. They are a little bit more cautious, and Japan is the same thing. So they still remain their states remain very strong, and so some of these things haven't happened. So here in Denmark, for instance, automatic checkout are a rarity. And the reason why it is because, well, partly because we still have strong unions that have prevented the wholesale, the retail monopoly. There's a duopoly here. But they prevented that from happening. They say, no, you still have to provide jobs, despite the fact that we have the technology. And so it's a political decision that has been made, a political
Mm-hmm.
compromise
Mm-hmm.
between, on the one hand, unions and employers, and said, well, there is a technology out there that will save money, but the most important thing is to maintain jobs, for these people. So they're being able to do it. And I don't think I don't feel that things here are worse than Australia. They actually, Denmark is one of the most productive countries in the world. According to the OECD, much more than
Yes.
Australia actually. So how do they do that?
Mm.
When they don't, they're not following these uh, ideas about the market will solve all problems. um, um, I think they're able to do it because they are more careful about what it means. So it's not it's more common in places like Australia and the US and the UK, but less common in continental Europe and Japan. And then, in the developing world, there's varieties, So
Yeah.
again, yeah. But definitely has been a change, a shift, from the years in the 60s and 70s when the state was really big
Mm-hmm.
to what we have now. And I think that that has created a world that has become much more susceptible to shocks. So we've
Yeah.
seen, quite a number of recessions and in the last few years. The worst was, of course, the one happened in 2008, the global financial crisis. But what
Yes.
we're dealing with now, this is the first, would say, virus-led recession. It's
Yeah.
serious as well, and we can see how vulnerable we are. And I still don't hear governments or political parties coming up with radically different ideas about how we should govern our economies. They are still thinking we let's we're waiting for a vaccine or something to come up, and then we'll get back to normality. Well,
Yeah.
that normality actually is very, very susceptible to shocks. Why don't we do something to strengthen and to make these economies more um, stable and sustainable over the long term?
Yes.
Why do we want to go back to a system that is so vulnerable to whatever happens outside,
Yeah.
when we could do something better? But I haven't seen a single party, in Europe, in Australia. New Zealand is about to have an election. The US is about to have an election. I haven't, seen anybody saying anything to that effect. In actual fact, everybody's just going, we'll have more of the same. So,
Yeah, the
um,
new COVID normal, post COVID normal, and it's a lack of, possibly around lack of accountability. Maybe that there needs to be more to keep governments and public sector accountable in this space.
yes, that's right. Yeah, yes. So,
Mm.
that is yeah. So that's what I think in relation to, I don't know if I answered your question, but
No, no, you definitely did. I think it's yeah, I think it's really interesting, and I like how you talk about the fact that it really does differ by by different country and regions and whatnot.
mm,
I think it's right. There is definitely some work that needs to be done in that space, and it definitely there needs to be more accountability. And
mm,
I guess speaking of accountability, I know that you also do a lot in the international governance space. Now, that's the governance is sort of the way that we connected with Aarhus University, and we'll probably talk about that in a moment. I'm really interested in sharing more with our listeners around what is governance. There's so much lack of understanding and misunderstandings around what governance is, and what does it mean. I think it's really misunderstood, particularly even in the sort of the world that I'm in the project management world. You hear the word governance and you're just thinking process police and all of these sort of negative connotations, but governance is really important. So I'm interested to know a little bit more from your perspective, what is international governance as a starting point?
yeah. So international or global governance is a particular type of governance where we have, for instance, international bodies such as the OECD, the World Trade Organization, the WHO at the moment, the World Health Organization.
Mm-hmm.
There's quite a number of them, and they're all dealing with issues of how not govern, because they don't have the power to govern, but they set out rules by which everybody about, well, not everybody, most countries abide by. And one thing that should be clear is that all of these organizations, countries gain membership, they apply for membership, they gain membership, and of course, then they comply, they ratify many of the agreements. Nobody does things without having ratified them. In other words, nobody is there, no country is there against their will. All of them are, and if you don't like it, then you can leave. For instance, the U.S. has just left the World Health Organization,
Mm-hmm.
and the same applies for many other international organizations. Not all countries are members. Some are. Uh, they have different status, like visiting or observer status. Some are full members and what have you. But by and large, most of them are in one or another international organization.
Okay.
I just give you one little example that I know from. There's a body called the Universal Postal Union. The Universal Postal Union was created in the 18th century, and it's continued on. This is what sets the rules for basically the post, that you still use.
Mm-hmm.
After World War II, they decided that to help countries in the developing world, because you had all of these independent countries, that they were going to charge a discounted rate, for um, uh, people to post letters, say, and parcels from these countries to other countries. So you pay relatively less, for a letter or a parcel if it's coming out of, say, El Salvador, than if it's coming out of Australia. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
relatively. I mean, it's a letter with 1 or 2 pages inside is almost nothing. Weighs very little, but the cost. I don't know how they subsidize it, but basically it's less, for developing countries. To increase communication, to be able, for most countries to do that. So um, with China becoming more and more over the years, with China becoming oh, sorry, I have to go back and say that the whole idea of this, of course, is to help not just these countries increase their communication capabilities, but also to help them develop, to progress their economies. So
Yes.
that's the main. Now, um, you know, fast forward to 2000 and to 2020, and you have China being, a country that's grown a lot, that has developed, the way that we believe the development should happen. Um, but they still are under the Universal Postal Union's scheme of being able to use this discount.
Mm-hmm.
So what is happening now is you have companies, Chinese companies such as I think, is it Weibo, or what's the other
Weibo, yeah.
company that?
Yeah, Weibo.
There is another company that where you can actually shop for things, and they all come from
Alibaba?
China. Alibaba, yes.
Yes.
Alibaba, many of these companies, it is actually very cheap to buy from those places because the
Yes.
rates are cheap. The sending rates are cheap. It allows these companies to do that because there is an agreement between all countries that this is going to be the case. Now, many
Mm.
countries in like the United States are saying, "Oh, this is not a good idea anymore," or it is more expensive for somebody, say, in California to send a parcel to Florida than it is to get it from China. So I mean, this proves a couple of things. One is, yeah, it is true, and of course the Chinese are taking advantage of this situation, but wasn't it supposed to be that way? The whole idea was that you do these things so that they could then compete. Now they're competing. Uh,
Yes.
I don't like it. I don't like that they, you know,
Uh-oh.
yes, yeah. What have I produced? A monster. So, and this happens all the time.
Yes.
So, what
Yes.
they're doing, of course, in the Universal Postal Union is one vote for, and most countries in the global South, what we call, are saying, no, we like this system. China is only one country. We still are poor. So, countries like El Salvador and so many other poor countries are saying, no, this is fine. It's working fine. So,
Yeah.
it is a governance. It's an agreement that has created a governance framework. Yeah. And so
Exactly.
this
Framework.
is, yeah, and there are hundreds of agreements and hundreds of things we do that are able to do in our everyday life as a result of this agreement. So, of course, we know the ones that occur at our say our council and our state level and even Australian level or national level, but there are also a lot of agreements made at the international level, and some of them don't affect us personally, but others do, do it. This is one, Um, so um, international governance uh, is related to that type of thing, where what is the best way for this, not just for, what is the best way to deal with situations that arise, and also the best way of dealing with issues such as disease, for instance. How do you Okay, I'll give you one example. The whole thing with might remember a few years ago with the Deepwater Horizon in
Yes.
of the coast of Texas, and how it was spewing oil and that.
Yeah.
Um,
Devastating
it,
to the environment.
Devastating to the environment.
Mhm.
When they started to look into the actual, the government, the U.S. government wanted to know who owned the platform, and they wanted to basically find out who was responsible for what. Because
Yes.
BP is a huge company, and
Yes.
they do a lot of what they call, as many other companies do, they do a lot of subcontracting.
Yes.
Well, okay, so we know that the buck stops with BP, but let's
Mhm.
have a look at who owns the platform. Well, the platform is actually rented. Is rented, by a company that is
Mm.
registered in I think it was the Bahamas or someplace like that. But platforms are actually regarded in the law of the sea as ships, and so they're
Yep.
registered. And what is happening in the shipping world now is that many of them are registered in what they call flags of convenience, places like
Okay.
Panama, Liberia. Why do they do that? Is because the tax rates are favorable. You can
Mhm.
register quite easily. You don't have the same labor laws as, say, a country like Australia or the United States. And so
Mhm.
this is one of the reasons why in those ships you see a lot of Filipinos,
Yep.
sailors, and also people from Kiribati, people from developing countries. The
Yes.
actual labor laws are very weak. Basically, think about it this way: you rent out a car that is
Mhm.
not registered, in the country that you are using it. Is registered in, say, an African country that
Mm.
has a very little, very few rules about safety and health. But you're driving the car, say, in Australia, yeah.
Yes.
And what happens when you have an accident in it? So it's a
Yes.
similar thing that happened here. The platform is actually rented out by a company that runs its business from one of these flags of convenience locations. So not only that, then they started going, okay, so that's okay. We'll find, we'll find who the owner is. They found it. Then, okay, who designed this? Because they said it was a design problem. So yes, of course, I think Hyundai had made it,
Mhm.
but it was, like I said, owned by someone else. It
Yep.
it was very difficult for the U.S. government, the courts, to try to find out some kind of, because you want to find these situations, you want to find out who is liable. Yeah,
Yeah,
is it
exactly.
liability? But the governance of this area of the economy is so weak and full of
Yeah.
holes that it was very difficult to blame them. I mean, in the end, BP, of course, had to front up, but when, of course, they were blaming the subcontractor, and the subcontractor were blaming the person that, oh, but we rented out from here, and
Yes.
then okay, so
And the
who's the
designers and the
and
all
the
that.
designers, all of that. So it's a nightmare, and
Yeah.
so those are the sorts of things that international governance is trying to avoid.
Yeah.
We want to create a kind of world that is much more accountable, and that is much more that how things are going to occur, if something goes wrong. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
absolutely. So you need it
yeah,
when you need it when something, it's preventative maintenance. So you need it when it goes wrong. It's sort of like you mentioned framework. It's having those guardrails in place up front. Everyone knows the accountabilities, and then if something does go horribly wrong, as has with Deepwater Horizon's situation, not
mhm.
only do you have visibility of the accountabilities, but you can also trace back where the fault was, or where the challenge was, or where the hurdle was, so that you can rectify it so it doesn't happen again.
Yes. So, I mean, but of course, governance means different things. This is, we're talking about international governance, and we're talking about, big bodies. But what about, for instance, within companies, and within even, countries, or small units of organization? So, let me quote you. There's a guy. Um, this is Baruch de Spinoza, or Benedictus de Spinoza. He, depending on, Baruch is the Jewish name and Benedictus is the Latin name. De
Okay, how do
Spinoza
I
was
spell
one
that?
of de Spinoza, DE, one
Yep.
word. Well, his first name is Baruch, so Baruck, or
Yep.
Baruch.
Ruch. Yep.
Yeah, de Espinosa, DE,
Mm-hmm.
and Espinosa is SPINOZA.
Yep. Okay.
So
Beautiful.
this is an important philosopher, the Dutch philosopher. In 1677, he wrote a book called The Political Treatise. He wrote it as a result of the Dutch Reform Church interfering into the then Dutch government's very open policy and very tolerant policy towards other religions.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't like that. Anyway, Spinoza, being a Jewish from uh, background, Portuguese background,
Mm-hmm.
he felt that this was an affront and a threat to not just the Jewish community, but all the communities there. Decided to write this book, which basically it is considered as one of the not the founding ideas, but a contributor to this idea of a strong democratic thinking, in at that time.
Mm-hmm.
He said, so he in this political treatise, he said men should be governed in such a way that they do not regard themselves as being governed. And so he basically was saying, we should be easy on the government. The government shouldn't be dictating to people.
Okay.
They should regard us being as being governed, but as following their own bent and their own free choice in their manner of life. So basically, this sounds a lot like liberalism. You do as you please, but you still govern in such a
Mm-hmm.
way then that they are restrained only by love of freedom, desire to increase their possessions, and the hope of obtaining office of state. So basically what he's saying is, let's have a governmental system that allows these people to allows people to do all these things that they want to do, but we should still be able to govern them. In other words, we shouldn't interfere, we shouldn't be dictating. He could see that from the Dutch Reformed Church wanting to impose more constraints into what was then probably religious minorities. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So he wrote that book, and it caused such an uproar that some of the critics said this book is forged in hell by the devil himself.
Oh.
Um, yes, so they didn't like him. They didn't like him for saying that. He was I mean, he was also excommunicated from his own, from the Jewish religion, for saying other things about God and that sort of thing, because he didn't believe in the ever-present God. He was more a rationalist, and he believed mostly about God as manifesting in certain things, which was completely against, what what Jewish religion was then, saying. So, uh, but for this idea, he was criticized. Now, if you jump to now to the current times, no, let's not jump to the current time, but let's jump to late 1970s, and Michel Foucault, French philosopher, said that he started to come up with the idea of governmentality. Governmentality is much broader than just government. It's about the way we conduct ourselves. And here he says one of the things is that there are many ways, mechanisms, and rules that people and governments and organizations use to help us conduct ourselves. So for
Mm-hmm.
him, governance is about the conduct of conduct. Yeah. So it applies to everything. It applies not just to government, but it also applies to companies. And he says the most effective form of governing is when we ourselves internalize, the ways that the certain norms. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So, for instance, um, uh, we in the past, people used to smoke, and smoke publicly, then with a lot of campaigning from not just the government but also from NGOs and that, and health bodies. uh, People now, it's not that they're listening to the government about not smoking. It's also because people themselves, and the individual themselves are thinking, this is not good for me.
Mm-hmm.
So you internalize something that was a rule before, and then you internalize it. And then this is, according to Foucault, the most effective way of governing, because you become your own regulator. uh, you know, I see it, for instance, in houses in many places. People who smoke actually go outside their own homes
Yes.
if there are others who don't smoke. So they're self-regulating there. They're saying, I don't want to, I can do it myself, but I don't want others to, smoke. So they go outside. another is time. Another example is time. So you don't need somebody to tell you that you have to be at a particular place at work, for instance, on time. You carry a watch and you keep telling yourself, I have to be there at a particular time. So these forms of governance actually shape us. They shape our conduct. Yeah. So it's a very powerful way of governing in a society such as what Spinoza was saying. How do you ensure that everybody is more or less going in the same direction when everybody has so much freedom? You know, well, the best way of doing it is not by having a strong government, according to these people, yeah, is by
Yeah.
having a system of governance um, that is internalized. Yeah. So, for instance, for companies, we can talk about, say, ethics or corporate social responsibility. The best way of governing is not, of course, it always helps having a very charismatic leader and, having all the frameworks and everything. But if you can get everybody to self-regulate within that company, then it's so much better, so much more effective. Yeah, than things coming from outside or from the top.
Yeah.
So this is where Foucault brought about governmentality, and this is how we can see governance in companies, but there's other types of government, and these are just two or one view, but there's many others. I mean, there's hierarchical governance, there's
Yes.
governance that comes as a result of networks, governance as a result of communities, governance as a result of what was the other one that I forget now, but it'll come. But there's many different types, and there is no agreement as to what is governance. So it is it's a contested term. There is no agreement, and this is why it may seem like confusing, because yeah, I got it now. It's governance as markets, where it's actually the market that provides the framework for governance. The price of things, the price is everything. And so don't be surprised that there is no agreement, and people use it in different ways. But for instance, if we take this idea of governmentality, by Foucault, then you would see that it's actually makes sense, for people to internalize things. Yeah.
Yep.
But it is one way of governing. It's not the only way.
Yeah.
There's others. And I think that if when you have, for instance, piece of legislation is actually not a very good way of governing, because people break the rules all the time. It may be an ethical is another way of, but it's also aspirational. So again, some people may not be not adhere to that. So the thing is, whatever type of governance you use, there's cost, of ignoring it. Whether it's your organization becomes inefficient, or your organization, as in the case of British Petroleum, runs into problems of accountability. Yeah. And also the other thing is that people themselves, within organizations may find that this is not an organization, a good organization to work for, because we're being told one thing, but we're acting in a different way. So
Yes, and that goes back to the comment you make around the ethics, for example.
Yes, yes. And also, and here is where I think the leadership is important, to make sure that whatever
Yes.
type you use is then is followed through. You don't say one thing and
Yes.
then do another, because people can see that and then they could say it's hypocrite, or there's no alignment, and all these things.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely.
Mm,
Okay.
yeah.
It's interesting. Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry. um, I was going to say to you that eh, don't be surprised that there is such a different people are using governance in different contexts in different
Yes.
ways. But um, I, I guess many at the beginning when this was created, and I think that the Spinoza was trying, it was one way. One of the exponents, they many of them they were talking about conducting oneself. Governance meant almost like a conduct, like ethical conduct. But then it became the realm of state state officials. And I think that it stayed like that until recently. So government or the act of governing became kind of like the realm of politics, the realm of states, the realm of politicians.
Yeah.
Now there's been a return to the original term, which is broader, and this is why I brought Foucault into the equation, because it's not just the realm of politics and the realm of the states. It's actually realm of just about everybody, in companies,
Mm-hmm.
governments, individuals.
Mm-hmm.
We and uh, how we conduct ourselves has a very strong relationship to how we conduct ourselves, how companies conduct themselves. If you have a company that is led by somebody who is not ethical, I don't think you're going to be able to have an ethical company, even if everybody was ethical, but not the CEO. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, or the other way around. When you have a very let's say a responsible person at the top, but nobody else. And this happens in many governments. Where you bring in somebody who is very popular because everybody thinks that this person's clean, but the whole
Mm-hmm.
system's corrupt,
Yeah.
and so you get a talking head at the top. It's the same thing with companies. If you have a company that is not working well, you may have a very good head leader or CEO at the top, but it will not last very long.
Yeah, absolutely. You actually hit the nail on the head by talking about sort of key components being the framework is one thing, and having some sort of framework to help guide people. The leadership is obviously really important, and then I think the third part around self-regulation. I'm seeing that at the moment in the sort of project management space with some different ways of working and agile methodologies and things. So going into the project management space, which is kind of the next area I wanted to touch on. Self-regulation is really good, but it just needs to be applied. People need to feel that they themselves, as you said, are conducting themselves in a manner that is in line with what the organisation aspires to, and following the leaders and whatnot. So it's interesting. Self-regulation is really important, but I don't know how effective it is. I think it varies as much as the different views on governance in general. Would you agree?
Yes. I mean, the thing is, self-regulation assumes that we're up to to a certain extent that we're kind of logical, rational individuals who know what we want, but we're completely irrational, and we we may say we want something, but we actually want something else. We're completely we're not. I wouldn't say we're irrational, but we're, if we were rational, I don't think that we follow through very well. So that's one problem. The other thing is, I think the mechanisms for the reward mechanisms, in companies, in current modern organization, contemporary organizations, um, um, one of the most powerful ways of getting people to do work, well, no, the established way is the income, that they're getting. But income is such a small part um, of people's lives. It is big in the sense that, of course, we rely on that to make us live, but in the value systems that we have, because there's so many, a lot of people, for a lot of people, it's not enough. So you have to find, you have to actually, I think, customize the reward system that you have for different workers, and you know how difficult that is. Um, but the thing is that for some people, the economic reward is only part of the equation. Then they want, there's uh, more control, or it can be more responsibility, or more recognition. There's different things that work, and so I don't think that self-regulation works completely on its own. You have to have a reward system that accompanies it, that is aligned as well with this, so that people become a little bit more conscious of the reason why I'm doing this is because I can get recognized or what have you. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
So yeah. But I also think, like, in terms of project management, I think that the other thing, and you already know this, I think we already know it, is the whole communication, and just trying to get ideas across that actually what you meant.
Yes.
Lack of communication, it's a big problem. And I think that if we can create these systems that are conducive to good communication, and again, here is where governance comes into the picture, then things could be much, much better. But there's hundreds of authors and books and stuff written on this, on this. So I think that we can only just learn a little bit and hope for the best.
Yeah, absolutely.
We can't know everything that there is. So I guess perhaps the best thing is to be consistent, so that if you have a very strong governance in your own organization, something that you feel that is working well, and aligned to your value system, your system of rewards, then at least you know that you're in a very strong position to then come to work with other people. The problem, of course, is, okay, what about when we come across perhaps not ineffectual but non-functioning organizations, dysfunctional organizations, and there are those, yeah.
Yes.
So how do we do it. I mean, it's almost as if we have to take the position of the therapist, because these organizations are dysfunctional. Before we can do anything, we actually have to fix that dysfunctionality, or not fix it, but make them reflect about how dysfunctional the whole thing is.
Especially the leadership team, we find quite a lot in the work that we do is it really is about talking to people, reviewing what's there, understanding where the challenges are, and actually listening to them. Because often the teams that work within these organizations underneath the leaders, are aware of the problems and the challenges and the things that they need to be successful that's causing the dysfunctionality. But often the leadership team is quite helicopter view in organizations. They don't see it, or they don't have the time to give it the attention it needs. So I think you're spot on. I think it's all about communication and making sure that you actually are talking to these people to understand what is the reason for the dysfunction, and then trying to address it. And governance is a big part of that, I think, as well.
Yes. So and we I mean, it's not the work of the consultant, but like I said, you almost have to take that that role, that role of I don't like saying therapist, but the role of the one who makes the client reflect about the dysfunctionality, so that they can then do things to address it. Yeah. Before you can even start working with them, because how do you make that happen? How do you get a project going when the system is dysfunctional? So that's one problem, of course. But I think that in terms of, I think that there should be a course, or when you're working with a client, you're already in the fray, so it's you have to do it as a kind of helping to reflect. But I think that maybe we could have a course on governance, a short course for people to understand how important this is, to raise awareness of the importance of governance, and to examine it, in its very broad form, and also in its specific form, the way in which it affects us, as workers in organizations. Yeah. So I think that something is raising awareness of this issue can be a good thing, towards addressing some of these problems. So that, and it should be, I think, not the rank and file, but actually some leaders and CEOs in companies that should learn, more about these, so that they are aware that this is important, and to be able for them to be able to recognize, where they may be going wrong, or where they can improve things.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've talked about this a few times as well in the past, and previous conversations, and obviously we've done some work together at the university last year and things like that. And it's definitely been a contentious topic, because I think it is that lack of awareness. They a lot of the time people don't realize they're actually missing this sort of information that would really probably open up their eyes into what's going on in the organization. But I guess they're just, these executives are so busy with everything else that they're doing that maybe it's just not prioritized until, like we gave the example before, Deepwater Horizon or something else of that sort, maybe not as drastic, goes wrong. And then that's where the microscope comes out, and it's looking at where the problems are in that journey as well. So,
or it can be expressed in other form, more in perhaps not as big events such as that, but it could be something chronic like high turnover of people.
Yeah.
Good people come and then they leave. That this is
Yeah.
a problem.
Yeah.
Yeah. So they definitely, I think, we have been talking about it, you and I, about this governance thing, but also I perhaps should be mention, our work that we did last year, because I think
Yeah.
that, I mean, it was perhaps a small example, but I think that it went, in terms of governance, it went really well. But there was, of course, a lot of planning, and
Mm-hmm.
when it was actually the relationship we had were, once we started to implement it, went really well. I mean,
Yeah.
perhaps you, I don't know if you, I can say something about this
Yeah.
work that
Yeah.
we did together.
Yeah. Happy to
So
share.
yeah, so um, uh, we have a class that is for it's called International Project Management, and within this class, the students basically learn the basics of project management at international level. Some of them have experience working in project management, others are not experienced in that field. Most of them are actually from the social sciences, so they haven't had any experience working for companies, or for in the commercial world. But we give them this training because we believe that when they finish, they will A, work in teams, and B, work in projects. So this is why we teach them that. It's part of their international and their masters in international studies
Mm-hmm.
here at the university. And when I talked to Fatima about this, idea that we should um, let the students work with an actual case, not, for many years I've been working on hypotheticals and, simulations, but then we thought, how about let them work with a real case, and also that maybe they can learn a little bit, not just about the classical project management tools, but also some of the work that Fatima is doing, in terms of Agile.
Agile and the AMO method as
And
well
the
being
AM,
something new for them.
yeah, and the AMO method. So we started to have conversations in relation to how we would do it.
Mm-hmm.
We came to an agreement, and basically Fatima was, part of the teaching team, with students, basically doing work for Fatima and coming up with ideas with the project Empires. That's what it was called, yeah.
Yeah.
And you can probably give them more details about what they needed.
Yeah. I think
Yeah,
with that one, the Project Empire was really about taking a really large issue, which at the time it was the Australian Banking Financial Services Royal Commission that was occurring sort of in 2019, and it was, how do we take what has happened as a result of that Royal Commission and the issues and the challenges and all of the observations that were made around banking and financial services, and actually identify some possible solutions. And so the students in your class, and for those listening, Vladimir's class, they banded together and over a period of time really took not only the theory that they were learning in the class, but also then some of the practical contributions to help identify solutions for the Banking and Royal Commission sort of project that we scoped out and planned for them. So it was a really interesting one. How do you from the feedback you got from the students, Vladimir, how did you find that the students were able to integrate the theory they were learning and then the practical side and actually having that engagement with AMO throughout that journey?
I think they really enjoyed the setup. They enjoyed the interaction. Um, there was I think they felt that this is actually something that we're doing for real. So it's not a simulation, and they, of course, they were a bit more careful about what they did. Um, and they also you're much more interested. So yeah, I guess we have a student who is now doing an internship with AMO as a
Yes.
result of
So
that engagement. Yes,
very
but
exciting.
there were all the students who were very inspired by the whole thing. There was only one student who questioned why we were working for AMO when they didn't know anything about the financial markets, financial system in Australia. And I tried to explain to this student that in the world of consulting and in the work of project management, that you're basically thrown into the deep end. When you're given a consulting job, and you have to get up to speed with things that you have very little knowledge of, and you have to do it quickly, and you have to do it to a level that you sound confident, talking about these things. So I tried to explain to the student that it was going to be only after a few years that doing consulting that she could choose the kind of consulting that she could do. But the first
Yes.
ones that we're going to do were going to probably be things that she didn't have any knowledge about. And this was just one of them, the financial sectors. Nobody in the class knew about finance. They were all new to it.
Yes.
So they had to get up to speed. And just judging from the grades they got, we got a few very good grades. We got a few not so good grades, but these were the students not taking full advantage of the situation, I think. But it happens all the time with courses. You get a bell curve. But in this particular class, there was I would say, a bias towards the good grades, which made
Okay.
me really happy. It was a bell curve that was biased towards the better grades, as opposed to the bad grades. So I was happy in that sense from my point of view. And yes, I think that the university here likes to promote, partnerships with organizations outside. So we thought that because it enriches the students' experience,
Yeah.
and I think that the students got a lot. So they didn't just get like I said, traditional project management methodologies. They also got AMO's methodology, and hopefully, they remember some of this thing, and they can apply it. I mean, it's a lived experience, so it's not something that they just learn in a book. They actually did it. So I'm sure that they will be able to apply it later on in life.
Definitely. Definitely. And I'm actually seeing that firsthand since we've had Sophie, previous student from your class, in our internship at the moment. And she has been able to refer to things she learned in that course, both the practical elements that AMO brought, but also the theory, and actually utilizing them day to day in her role as an intern with us, which has been fantastic. And then the other positive thing that came out of it as well is, in addition to our partnership, the opportunity to actually leverage the insights and the work that the students had performed. So not only were they graded on them and assessed on them as part of their traditional university course, but actually we actually have leveraged the insights from those reports and the summaries and the plans and all of the work that students did, so it hasn't gone to waste, which I think is pretty rewarding, considering a lot of the time, you know, work gets done in school or university, it doesn't really go anywhere. So I hope that they like to hear that as well.
Yes, definitely. Yes.
Sounds
So I think that I don't know, but in terms of what we're talking about before, you know, governance, I think that the way the course was governed, you know, was inducive to this kind of thing. So I would have been very surprised if it had turned out badly. I think that the communication between two of us was really good. The input, the actual inputs from you into the you know, the course, the students, was also really effective, and I think that you can see it now from the way the students are responding. So yes, but you know, uh, I wonder how it would have gone if we had a different type of you know, governance system. I think you were part of
yep.
you effectively became part of the teaching team with access to everything here, and so I think that you know, that helped in all respects.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it definitely would have been interesting to see how different it would have been had, you know, someone from our team or myself been on site there, but actually being able to leverage technology tools to actually do some of our class remotely, I think was really positive, because we were able to not only teach the students how to use a new technology that most of them hadn't experienced before, but some of those students, as I've understood, continue to use that product now. I know that Sophie, our intern, is actually having to use it day to day. So the fact that she's learned it has given her that added advantage. So, and personally, I am very grateful that we had the opportunity to work together. I feel like we've learnt a lot as well on the academic side from yourself and the class, but actually just leveraging each other's knowledge and insight made it a very much enjoyable experience, and I look forward to continue doing other things together in the coming months and years as well.
Definitely, yes. We'll see whether there's you know, other opportunities.
For sure, absolutely. Well, Vladimir, this has been a fantastic conversation. It's actually been the first long form interview that I've had. Most of them are much shorter, and this one has just been one that I probably could continue talking to you for several hours more, which you know, because we do talk often. I have a ton of questions that I would have loved to get through today, but unfortunately we run out of time. But I'm sure we'll probably do this again in the future, and we can cover off all the ones we missed from today. So I guess just in closing, I'm interested to know if there's anything else that you'd like to share with our listeners, a call to action, a piece of advice, or maybe a question to ponder.
I guess being an educator, I always think that we all need to learn more, you know, and to improve our learnings, and perhaps to, you know, try to keep up to date, and also try to learn, you know, these new methods that are coming up, especially in this space of project management. You know, the Agile ideas. I think you have a very good idea with AMO. So try to, you know, stay abreast of these developments. I think because it would help the practice of project management.
Yes, absolutely. As a profession, that's really a really good point. Thank you for sharing that. I am very grateful that we had the chance to talk. I will share all of the key points that we talked about and your LinkedIn's and your socials and access to if people wanted to find out more about you in our show notes. But otherwise, thank you again for joining me, and look forward to future conversations.
Yes, thanks for inviting me to the podcast, and I hope that the listeners enjoyed it as much as I did.
I'm sure they did. I'm very sure they did.
Thank you for listening to this podcast. We welcome any feedback. Please let us know by going to www.agilemanagementoffice.com/agile ideas. You can also find us on most social media channels by searching Agile Ideas, or follow me on LinkedIn. Thank you for listening. Please share or rate this if you enjoyed it. I hope you've been able to learn, feel, think, or be inspired today. Until next time, what's your Agile idea?